Good evening, all of you. It's our pleasure to be back on demand because there have been so many questions, opinions, thoughts that have been pouring in over the past 2 weeks through all forms of social media. It has, of course, been an unprecedented response, and we're happy to come back and talk to you and cover all those points that you thought we should. I'm back here. I'm Gayatri Thakur, and I'm joined by Dr. Sujata Naik and Dr. Rajam Iyer. It's a pleasure to be with you once again and have this wonderful conversation with you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for being a part of this and joining us through all forms, through Zoom, through Facebook, YouTube, and what have you. Thank you again. Taking this ahead, this session is going to highlight those specific questions that have come about, where the experience and the thoughts of our doctors here will add value and, of course, help people in preparing maybe in a way. We all know that certain things are here to stay, so also the 2020 that we are seeing now. At this point of time, how is the road ahead? What is it that we need to equip ourselves with? Is what we are going to really be talking about. To start with, I'd like to go back to a little bit of last session where we spoke of how alternative therapies have been showing a lot of use in terms of influencing the kind of symptoms that have been seen. Dr. Sujata Naik, this question comes to you. What is data really suggesting? What is it that has been seen? Would you like to really talk about it here?
Hi, Gayatri. Hi, Rajam. Good evening, all of you. And it's wonderful to be back on this platform. And here we are again, 2020 and beyond. And last time it was about the generic aspect of the whole thing, what 2020 is going to look henceforth. But today we are going to speak about the road ahead, about how to tackle the problems that are now going to be in the aftermath of the COVID, assuming that it's on its way out. And if we have to go by what the reports are showing, perhaps the worst is now already behind us. And we're keeping fingers crossed, and we are looking at the picture ahead with a little more optimism. Now, regarding Gayatri's question about what role alternative medicine has played in the current pandemic, I would say that this virus, the COVID-19, has been a very unpredictable virus. And that's the fear associated with the virus is because of its unpredictability. The way it has come, the way it is totally unprecedented, the way it has attacked the most unexpected segment of the society, the manner in which it has attacked, and the fear and the terror that it has unleashed is absolutely unprecedented. So anything that we have now is going to be setting parameters henceforth because we have no experience of this COVID-19 at all. It's a novel coronavirus. So in terms of alternative medicine, from the beginning, say from February when we started seeing a rise in cases in India, the Ayush Ministry had already issued notifications to all the streams of alternative medicine, including homeopathy, Ayurveda, and of course Unani and Siddha. Yoga, of course, has been a way of life with most Indians, so that has actually helped us to withstand this onslaught much better than probably our Western counterparts. Regarding homeopathy, because the stress is on immunity, the stress is on constitutional therapy. If you recall, is that when everything that is associated with this virus is new, regarding the vaccine, because vaccine is not out yet, the treatments are still on hypothesis, trial and error. So everything is still based on hypothesis. We are going to try it and we are going to see the effects. That is how it has been so far. To stay alive, stay safe, and survive, that has been the maximum of this infection, this pandemic, because it has been so terrifying with the number of mortalities the world over. India is still in a better, safer zone, I would say. But considering that, if you realize that the stress has been on building your defenses, against the virus. And we are all talking about, if you realize, there's been a lot of spike in immune boosters of late. So whether it's Ayurveda or homeopathy or the other alternative system, which keep promoting the fact that you need to build up your defenses. And therefore, everything that is meted out by the alternative system is about building up your defenses, about providing immune boosters so that your core immunity, your core strength, your core defenses are built up against this virus. And we have seen that whether it was Ayurveda of course, the kadhas, the Ayush kadhas have become very popular. And what we knew already, it's a new realization. We always knew that turmeric has been known for its anti-infective properties. But now we realize that turmeric latte is the same thing. Have haldi doodh every day to boost up your immunity. Have all the things that were always present in our kitchens, in our grandma's batuas, are now coming to our use. So all the peppercorns and the cinnamon and the cloves are now back in use because we are putting them into the hot water. We are taking steam with it. We are drinking the water. We are drinking all kinds of herbal teas, herbal drinks, and that has become very popular. This is just so that our immunity is built up. As far as homeopathy is concerned, we all know that arsenic album, which has been touted as one of the most effective immune boosters from the homeopathy point of view, has been recommended by the Ayush Ministry. And there have been clinical trials run by the Central Council of Research in Homeopathy. And the observational data, there is no conclusive evidence that we only come to know at the end of the pandemic. But if we have to go by the clinical trials and the observational data that is available to us today, all those who have taken immune boosters from alternative therapies have definitely shown lesser morbidity, lesser mortality, and quicker recoveries. So this has been there, and there is a reason why India is low on mortality, is still low on morbidity, considering a 1.3 billion population. We are still, the mortality is still around 18,000, which is really very, very still controllable, very much under absolutely acceptable numbers. So there is a reason why this is happening, and I think alternative therapies have a big role to play in preventive role as far as COVID is concerned. Lesser and lesser people are reaching the ICUs because they've taken a lot of prevention. They've taken, because of course, the government of India and the Ayush Ministry have a lot of credit for this, and they have been promoting the preventive healthcare in a big way in terms of COVID. I think that has gone a long way. So I would say alternate therapies have already established themselves in this pandemic as immune boosters, as preventive, and perhaps as treatment options as well.
Nice. That sounds very fair. I mean, absolutely. I'm happy with this start to our session. I am now going to move on to something which is more current. So thank you, Dr. Sujata, for that. There is this pause, or let's call it, where people are now wondering, is there going to be a return of COVID? Is there going to be a relapse? Are these symptoms going to come back? Especially for people who've been through this, they are constantly in this, this days, or this, let's say, this fear of having to go through this again. Dr. Rajam, how susceptible is this segment of the population, and of course the rest?
So, as the name suggests, it is the novel coronavirus. So we are learning things about it as we progress in the pandemic. Initially, there were doubts about finding the antibodies. So there are these groups of people who are COVID positive and who've recovered. There are these groups of people who have had the symptoms but still COVID negative. So they are the false negatives. And they're probably people who never got themselves tested, but they have had a flu-like illness during the pandemic and they think they've had the COVID. They have not got it tested. We don't know. So initially, there have been reports of the antibodies being detected to the virus as being a question mark. But now there are patients who, despite being tested negative, we are getting their antibodies tested so that we can tell them they've had the infection. Now, the advantage of that is the fact that for that particular human being, that virus is no longer novel. Why are we having this pandemic is because of the body is also reacting to this new virus like a complete strange enemy. And that is the reason why there is a huge cytokine response, what we call as a cytokine storm, and that takes those patients to the ICU. So what is important here to remember is that once you have the antibody, maybe the second response to the virus may not be as strong as what you had because your body is already primed to that particular virus. So it recognizes the enemy and says, Acha, I have met this person before, so I can, act in this particular manner. Having said that, the antibodies or an infection in the past does not give you the immunity to not get it again. It is not like the chicken pox where you get it once and you never get it again. It is the influenza virus. So how many of us have had flu probably once in 2 years? We do get flu every other year, or maybe some people get even more than that. So similar to that, even corona, if you've got the COVID infection once, it doesn't keep you immune for the rest of your life. What probably will give you the immunity is the famous vaccine that we are all waiting for. But please remember that the vaccine also has to be safe. It has to be proved to be effective, and all the human beings in this world need to be vaccinated. So therefore probably that is, and also not just once, it has to be an annual vaccination, because viruses are known to change their faces, in medical terms, antigenic drift and antigenic shift every year. So when you talk of vaccinations for virus infections, it is an annual vaccination, and usually different for the north and southern hemisphere. We will have to wait and see how this COVID behaves, because as you can already see, the pandemic is behaving differently in different parts of the world. Like Dr. Nayak mentioned, in India, it is probably mutated to a milder version, or two, in India, we are used to exotic viruses, so we are kind of have an immunity, or the BCG vaccination probably supporting us from getting fulminant forms of the virus. Having said that, we still lose people with TB and malaria, and probably that's why the numbers of COVID don't seem to be that alarming, because other numbers are still scary enough and we still lose patients to those. So getting COVID once doesn't give you the immunity. You can still get it again. So you just need to be as cautious as you were the first time. So there is no taking away the mask, the hand washing, the social distancing, the cough etiquette, the spitting in public, all that must continue the way it has since March.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This takes me to the next question. We know that, yes, there are certain, we are talking of the possibility of these symptoms returning and so on. What about the residual symptoms? What about the lasting effects of the symptoms that have already hit somebody and which are here, which are still staying? I mean, I'm here. I would like to, of course, there are two questions here, but if you'd answer the first one, I'll go on to the next one. Specifically come from people who've been watching our sessions. So yes, what do people do? How do they prepare themselves to the lasting effects of the previous infection?
So I think I should start with a little optimistic note that I think I also mentioned in the last time, that the statistics does show that 80% have mild symptoms, which means they've stayed at home, they've done the usual anti-flu measures, they've taken the simple medications and they've felt better. 14% have gone to the moderate, and 5% have been critical and requiring intensive care. So it is not all bleak. Having said that, those people who have had mild symptoms also, and the moderate ones, now that we are about 5 or 6 months into the pandemic, from the rest of the world, we are getting reports of people having persistent symptoms. And those persistent symptoms could be just muscle aches called as myalgia, or chronic fatigue syndrome, where the person just doesn't feel like getting off the bed. He's all the time tired, not motivated to do work. There are some people who remain breathless. There are some people who are affected by the psychological feeling of this whole thing, or even in this. So there have been persistent symptoms like even headaches or loss of taste, loss of smell. So there are certain physical symptoms that have been documented, and now the reports are still coming in. So it's still very early stages for medical literature to actually prove, but there have been reports of people having persistent symptoms. So it is likely that like most viruses, we have what we call as post-viral asthenia, which lasts for 4 to 6 weeks. With COVID, I think it could be longer because of the body's reaction to it. It reacts like it's a new thing. So I think the intensity with which the body reacts, it takes a lot of while for the body to heal. And I think in this pandemic, since for this generation, whoever is alive now, it's like been the first ever time they've experienced it. I think the psychosocial aspects of it, the fact that people have lost jobs, the fact that certain vocations have disappeared from this earth for good, And for example, especially in India, the festivals, the weddings, the catering, there's so many people who have completely, I think it also has an effect which is going to be felt for a long time to come.
Sure, absolutely. I mentioned that there was another question which followed this.
Sure.
I'm also hoping that you will bring the relevance to the symptoms that are seen, especially to the lung. I mean, what about the lasting effects to the lung here? Knowing from your experiences, I'm sure you'd be the absolute right person to actually answer here.
So that's again, I think it is a respiratory virus to start with, and the transmission is airborne. So the upper respiratory tract is the way it enters the body, which is why we keep saying not to touch your hand to the face, etc., because that's the way it enters through the mucosa of the upper airways. So the lung is the primary organ affected. Having said that, that's of course the most common, but now there are reports of GI symptoms and rashes, etc. But the lung definitely is. So the way it affects the lung is that it causes a pneumonia. In certain cases, it heals by fibrosis. So that's where it is the long-lasting effects are seen. But a lot of autopsy reports that have now come in of patients who are dying actually show microangiopathy. So there is a lot of clot formation, or what we call as clotting inside the vasculature. So therefore, it seems to be a virus that is pro-clotting. And this is not just in the lungs. Lung clotting probably is the major cause of death. But this is seen everywhere in the body in the autopsied patients of patients who are proven to be COVID-19. And that is why in a lot of patients in the US, they call these people happy hypoxics, because they came normally walking, talking to the casualty, and they just dropped dead or they just collapsed. We have also had a couple of patients, a colleague of mine was mentioning from Bombay Hospital, who went home well and then just dropped dead because of the clotting. So the clotting is something that this virus has taught us to treat prophylactically, especially those people who are breathless, those people who have low oxygen, and those people who are looking well but feeling breathless. So it is the small clotting that is affecting the various small vasculature of the lung that causes this sudden deterioration. So this is the acute phase. In the chronic phase, what we have seen is that the lung heals by fibrosis, which means because of the rapidity with which it develops, these patients who survive may actually be a chronically respiratory cripples. So they might have to end up being in pulmonary rehab or with 24/7 oxygen or bedbound or housebound. And that is something that I don't think even pulmonologists were prepared. And now we have started seeing patients, like I said, 4 or 5 months into the pandemic, who are having fibrosis, which is probably irreversible and to some extent progressive.
Wow, that's something. That's absolutely something, Dr. Rajan. Dr. Sujata, alternative therapies, how can they help here? How can they help in terms of when in a relapse, when to expect a relapse, etc.?
Gayatri, the perception towards health, towards the patient is very different when it comes to homeopathy, when it comes to other alternative systems, because it is not a disease-centric approach, but a patient-centric approach. So it is not important what disease the patient has, but what kind of patient has the disease. So it is so to choose the remedy which is highly customized and very, very individualistic. A homeopath will consider the patient's constitution and all its, in the entirety. So it's not just the physical, but the emotional and the mental aspect of the patient's constitution is taken into account. So even now, if you realize that, as Dr. Rajam very rightly mentioned, that it's a novel coronavirus, and the way it has progressed, what kind of symptoms it will produce, nobody knew. So everything is new now. So even the after effects, the kind of long-term sequelae is still to be, there's no conclusive sign that we know exactly this is the way it's going to proceed. When it happens, we will know. So we don't know whether there are going to be relapses, major relapses, whether there's going to be a second wave, whether a particular kind of constitution are going to be facing more relapses and others are going to escape. There is still there's no clarity on this as yet. But as a homeopath, I can tell you for sure that whenever we treat a patient of COVID-19, Even earlier, if you see in the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, it was homeopathy which played a very major role in reducing the mortality. And patients who took homeopathic medicine as prophylaxis even then, coming very recently to the 2010 leptospirosis epidemic in Cuba, their homeoprophylaxis was given on a very large scale. And to date, all those who have taken homeoprophylaxis at that time have shown very little long-term complications. So even with this pandemic, let us hope that the role that homeopathy and probably other alternative systems have played would have long-term beneficial effects on the constitution of the patient. So it isn't that this is the medicine for COVID. It's a very different way of looking at the patient. For example, an allopath would have a very standardized, clear-cut formula for the patient because it's a disease-centric approach. So you'll say HCQS as prophylaxis, and perhaps you'll talk about remdesivir or tocilizumab or maybe methylprednisolone or maybe low-dose heparin for the anti-clotting prescription. But in homeopathy, it is the entire system that is taken into account, and there's a predisposition that we put a lot of stress on, the predisposition of the patient. And when the remedy is prescribed, it is not just about the symptoms of the COVID, but about the kind of patient that is predisposed to the COVID symptoms. You may have 5 people in a family, exposed to the COVID virus, and then maybe just 1 or 2 are actually suffering from COVID. We have seen all kinds of unlikely patients suffering from COVID. And the most likely person with high comorbidities and very, very bad general health are somehow surviving. Very, very fit people, athletes, and the bodybuilders are succumbing to it. And while there is really no explanation to this. So this is what the homeopath will zero down on, is the entire predisposition of the patient towards the illness. And the constitutional therapy that has probably been given in this epidemic might stand him in good stead to prevent a relapse and to help reduce long-term sequelae. But nevertheless, there are about 15 or 20 homeopathic drugs which have proven very, very beneficial throughout this pandemic because it was Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, who coined this term known as genus epidemics, which is one particular remedy which is aimed at treating the symptoms of that particular epidemic. Because when a large number of patients come with similar symptomatology, you can actually derive one common remedy which is probably suiting all. Although homeopathy is a customized line of treatment, yet we can still have a common remedy. And this in COVID-19, we all know has been arsenic album, which has been the typical immune booster. But even in treatment, we have found that about 10 or 15 remedies have really helped, and probably even those who have been chosen on the individual predisposition basis might help prevent a relapse. But we will need to have more inclusive data and a lot of observational studies conducted from now on to know. So by the end of the year, I think there'll be more clarity on this subject, whether there's a second wave coming or whether there's a relapse or not.
Sure, absolutely. I heard the word immunity, which kept coming as both of you spoke, and I really want to. I mean, this is something that I have been wondering about for some time now. Is immunity what it was 5 months ago? Is it to be redefined today? What do you think, Dr. Sujata?
I think it is a time for a total paradigm shift, actually, because what we thought was immunity is probably much more than what appears to the eye. And immunity, in terms of definition, is a person's defense mechanism against noxious influence like a microorganism. And to put it like in physiological terms, it's all about your white blood cells and about your T cells, your lymphocytes, your bone marrow, and the entire system, the entire defense system which makes up for your physical immunity. But as I just mentioned a while ago, is that this COVID has thrown up very, very different questions, which we all are going to have tough times answering. When patients ask us that my mother, who's 80 years old, and she's a diabetic, she's a hypertensive, and she is absolutely very, very weak. She's not suffering from COVID. And my brother, who is probably much younger, who has no comorbidities, who also is not going out during lockdown. Why has he suffered from COVID? Why is he so serious? So there is sometimes, we are going to have tough times answering those questions. While there will be a lot of answers in terms of biochemical, physiological pathways, pathophysiological pathways. But the fact remains that there is something much more to this. Immunity broadly, of course, we all know can be divided into 4 classifications. The first one being the innate immunity. The we are all born with. The acquired immunity, which we develop as we get exposed to pathogens over years, and then we start developing antibodies to it. And then the third one is the passive immunity, which a mother would give to her unborn child through antibodies. Or when, you plasma therapy, that is what we are going to be doing, is to when you give plasma to a patient who is suffering from COVID, from a person who is already immune to it, the antibodies are supposed to cure the patient of his serious illness. And of course, the last one is the vaccination or the immunization. Now we know that vaccine is yet not there. Acquired immunity is not there because we are still not exposed to the virus. This is new. We are just getting exposed to it and now starting to develop antibodies. So everything now boils down to the innate immunity, to the immunity that we are born with. And that is so different individually. And the individual response to a noxious influence, to a microorganism, is much more than your physical defense system. And it's time alone that is going to decide. But I think it's time for a complete overhaul of the system, of the way we look at healthcare, the way we look at disease. It's time to take a complete view of this. In fact, WHO has recently introduced, has encouraged the role of TCM, that is traditional and complementary medicine, in this pandemic, and is advising or encouraging the use of these systems more freely now. That's why in China, you must have seen, as I mentioned last time, more than 90% of the population have been given TCM very, very effectively. In India, the Ayush Ministry is doing a great job. They're already resorting to a lot of desi ilaj, as we say, along with homeopathy and other supportive measures. Time alone will tell. Of course, it's still a very disorganized sector. It needs to be more organized. There should be more robust clinical trials. There should be more evidence regarding the effects of these. Because anecdotal should now become empirical. So it's a time for complete paradigm shift in healthcare. And I think it's going to throw up a lot of interesting evidences in the time to come.
Okay. When you speak of paradigm shift, are you referring to this across age groups? Because that can be a challenge, right? I mean, when you describe the change of redefining immunity, being a shift from what it was, but we're also talking of different age groups. We're talking of an infant to a geriatric age group. Are we, then what kind of a shift are we talking about? And what is it that people really can do about it?
Yes, I think very interesting in this aspect is, and it's very interesting to note that the ones which were supposed to be the most susceptible, we were protecting our old people, we are protecting our elderly, protecting our children, protecting our women. And they are the ones who have shown the maximum resilience. In terms of ratio, if you look at it, the women are succumbing to COVID. The mortality in women in COVID-19 infection is much lower than in males. Probably Dr. Rajam will know the exact ratio, but it's much, much lower. In terms of children have, though they're testing COVID positive, they are getting away with very mild or perhaps asymptomatic cases. The elderly, of course, we need to protect. Probably we've been protecting them, and that is why they are showing a declining rate in terms of the infection and the morbidity and mortality. Nevertheless, I think these three sections have shown very good resilience, and there'll be a lot of studies, and I think the mental and emotional makeup of women also means that they are more resilient. Their ability to deal with changing situations, their adaptability to changing environments, even in terms of health, is much higher than in men. So probably the T cells are also more active and more robust. So in terms of geriatric, of course, we know that we need to take more care. Geriatric patients who have more comorbidities need to be sheltered better. That's for sure. But as I mentioned in the last session, is that what has been a little alarming is the high number of mortality in the age group of 50 to 65, 60, 62. And that has been a little alarming because probably those are the people who don't realize that they may be having underlying serious disease and are not taking as much care of themselves and succumbing to it. There might be a little more to that, but we will come to know as and when studies come out. So regarding these three sections, I think they've been doing pretty well otherwise.
Okay. Dr. Rajam, we are going to talk about adult immunization, something that you have spoken of earlier in an informal conversation, yes, but I really think this is the moment when you could kind of add value there about how relevant adult immunization today is. in this
So it is a very, very important question, because I think in India, especially, we focus, thankfully now, the child population, the pediatric population have probably the adult immunization program is well known. So whether you're born in the slums, or whether you go to a government hospital or a private hospital, everybody gets immunized and they have the little card of progress, etc. Just like that, I think what we tend to forget is that once a person starts getting older, about the age of 60, 65, and gets into the category of geriatrics, that's the time also when immunity starts waning. Kids are still experiencing their immunity, they're still building up their immunity, while adults start waning their immunity. And what COVID-19 also shows, like Dr. Nayak mentioned, is that the elderly are at risk. Thankfully, our country is still not that old yet, what we will be in 30 years' time. Therefore, also the mortality effect is not that much. But having said that, there are a lot of things that we could do to protect our elderly by simply vaccinating them. One of them, of course, is the influenza vaccine, which is now the quadrivalent flu vaccine available, which ideally should be given just before the start of flu vaccine, which could either be just before summer, April, May in India, or just as the monsoon is receding, like August, September is the time when there's peak of the influenza vaccine. So annually you need to give the flu vaccine. The reason again is because flu viruses are known to change their behavior every year. So to protect against that particular year of virus, you need to vaccinate regularly. And especially people who are elderly, so above the age of 65, or those who are diabetics, or those who have other comorbidities like have had cancer, big surgery, those kind of people, then you need to vaccinate them probably even after the age of 50 every year. The second important vaccine are the preventable pneumonias, which can happen in the lung, which are bacterial pneumonias. So there are two vaccines called Prevenar 13 and pneumococcal 23. So together they cover a comprehensible number of organisms that cause pneumonia infection. And I can share this from a personal experience, because the advantage of the bacterial pneumonia is you give them once and you have the immunity for life. So above the age of 65, you just give them once in a gap of about 8 weeks, the two vaccines. And for my own mother, I know that the fact that I vaccinated her, I think when she was about 70, 72, and she did get the pneumonia, in her late 70s, it was quite a nasty pneumonia. And I have seen patients with that kind of pneumonia not doing well, but the pneumonia vaccine helped her tide over that crisis, and touch wood, she's well today. And what I'm saying is these are preventable causes of death. I mean, this is this is again an airborne infection which could be prevented, and it's probably become a big pneumonia, which have become a cold in you and me because of the fact that they were elderly. So bacterial pneumonia can be prevented by these two vaccines. The other thing that I think Dr. Sujata sees very often is herpes. Herpes is an excruciating illness, especially in the elderly, and especially the post-herpetic pain and the comorbidity that it leaves behind. So there are vaccines actually to prevent herpes zoster in the elders. So, that's another thing that we could give them, so that at least the morbidity that they may experience, and the whole excruciating painful lesions that they get, and if it's the eye, they can lose an eye, they can lose hearing. So it's important to be aware of this and give your elders at home, or also those who are vulnerable to infections like diabetics, etc. So adult immunization is unfortunately something which is not very well known, and I don't think family physicians advocate it to elders. So it is something that all of us should ask your doctors and get to know about it. And I'm sure there are websites which I can also share, which actually discuss adult immunization, because these do prevent certain infections, and therefore it's like always the age-old mantra: prevention is always better than cure.
Sure, absolutely. You speaking of adult immunization, and I really think we should talk of geriatrics and advanced care that you have been advocating. You have been talking about it very, very strongly. how does, yes, it's not quite immunization, it's a lot more. What and how relevant is advanced care here?
In terms of the COVID pandemic, is that what you're asking?
I meant in terms of the COVID pandemic, for patients who've been through COVID, for geriatrics, and for those who do not have, even for the ones with non-COVID symptoms.
Sure. So let me tell you very honestly, I think the COVID pandemic actually has brought death and dying into very sharp focus because things are changing so rapidly, especially in the West. I think the West was so not prepared for it. Even we were not prepared. Thankfully, we did not have that many deaths, or touch wood, have not had that many deaths so far. But I think if you read the articles which come from the West, they have clearly pointed out about how, because COVID-19 did not have great outcomes in the elderly and the geriatric population with comorbidities, they actually didn't treat their elderly aggressively because their healthcare was overwhelmed. So if you read reports from England and Italy, they have actually care homes where they have just let their elders be. And what has actually morally distressed the doctors is the fact that they didn't have a chance to speak to these elderly before they didn't do anything actively, whether they would like to not do anything and just be offered comfort or palliative care. It is the right of every human being to decide how they want to exit this world. It has to be my right because it's my body, my life. And unless you do it at a time where I am mentally competent, so when patients are mentally competent, it's obviously you're going against their wish. And one of the pillars of medical ethics is autonomy, which needs to be respected, whether you're 60 or 90. The quality of life and what you want of your life should be decided by that particular individual. So there have been many papers published in the West where physicians had to undergo this moral distress because they had one ventilator, a 60-year-old and a 90-year-old. So does it automatically mean that the 60-year-old gets a chance and the 90-year-old is led to die? Even if you offer comfort care, the idea is to know beforehand. So to have those difficult conversations beforehand so that you know you're doing in aligned with the patient's wishes. So we've not had such disastrous scenes here because also we are not such an elderly aging population yet. But Italy, the mortality was high because of the elders. And in England, there are reports of care homes being wiped out by COVID because they really didn't think they could take them back to hospital because hospital was already overwhelmed with patients. So geriatrics, yes, very, very special. Like I always tell, they didn't turn 90 and 80 overnight. They have gone through life, and for all these people think about death. It's just that we as a society, in a culture, don't like to talk to them about it and we keep brushing it under the carpet. We must ask them because they are waiting to be asked. And it might not be all, but at least 8 on 10, we need to try. We need to try to have the conversation. We need to improve the training of medical doctors to be trained to talk and talk about death and dying in a sensitive, compassionate manner, obviously, and also be able to get the wishes of the patient so that we are ready. Because this is, again, many people are saying this is not the last pandemic for this generation. It's going to come back. So in order to improve the healthcare, rather prepare the healthcare professionals, as well as dish out good quality care experience for patients. So if you know this population of yours do not wish to be aggressively treated, then you know palliative care can be given because that's the least you can do for a human being is to give him comfort in his last days, which is also the reason why WHO Assembly pooled in March, gathered to say that palliative care has to be an important part of the pandemic because you can't cure everybody. 1. 2, you will have people where you do not have the resources to intubate, to ventilate, etc. What will you do? You can't just let them suffer. So we must include these things in our medical training and core curriculum so that we do produce compassionate, empathetic doctors, because the biggest problem we see is doctors do not communicate. And with all this that's happening in the COVID pandemic, with the PPE, with the mask, with the contagious, with family away, there is a whole lot of new dimension to communication, which we ourselves are relearning how to communicate behind the mask, how to smile with the eyes, how to convey empathy without touching. and yet connect the patient and the family and not have any self burnout, because doctors are also getting burnt out. So I think geriatrics is again a very essential, like pediatrics, we need to also celebrate geriatrics. Like birth, we need to talk of death as comfortably, and we must talk to our senior citizens to know what exactly they want us to do, how they would like to be treated in their last days. I think it's very, very important.
Sure. I wish there were many, many more doctors who are as communicative as the two of you. It really, really will help the rest of us. What about the child? What about the caregivers? You spoke. You mentioned caregivers, but that is a huge population. So how is it that caregivers, they are doing something which is very, very noble? How is it that they can be cared for?
So I think we are all caregivers, at various stages of our lives. First, we are cared for, then we are becoming the caregivers, and tomorrow we will need to be, again, it's a cycle. So all of us are caregivers, and I think there's different levels of caregiving. And I think somewhere, unfortunately, in the country, it is thought to be your duty. If you're a daughter or a son, you have to look after it. But the point is, they go through burnout also. So a very dear friend of mine has actually brought out this NGO called Caregiver Sathi. Her name is Bhavana Isar, and she's there on Facebook too. And she does a lot of support groups for caregivers, because I think they are emotionally, physically, financially, socially frustrated. And somehow it's not considered right when they complain. It's not, they feel guilty about complaining or leading a normal life. So I think caregiver burden is something that is not addressed in this country at all. And it's also something that we need to, it could be a child who's, infirm. It could be a parent. It could be, your spouse, and you are just not allowed to complain. So I think Bhavna is doing an excellent job of supporting these caregivers. She has online forums where they, just share experiences, give them mantras of how you can cope. Also the importance of appreciating caregivers, giving them a break. And this is also something which we really need to think in future as a society, is to offer respite care. And what I mean by respite care is how do you give caregivers a break? If you have institutions where they can admit their loved ones for 4 days or 5 days, where they know that their loved one will be taken care of, may not be exactly the way they do, but at least the food, the hygiene, the entertainment, then at least they can go guilt-free to 4-5 days for a break. So respite care is another big thing in the West, where patients get out of their homes. Suppose you're paraplegic or quadriplegic or just an elderly. You go to that home, but you're not admitted there. It's not the normal way of life. You spend a week, you spend 10 days, you're looked after, you pay a fee, and then you come back home. So everybody has a break, everybody has space, and especially for all of us, we only live once. So it's important that you need to balance your life vis-a-vis your life as a caregiver. So I think we must pat all our backs for being caregivers at different stages in life. And to all caregivers out there, a huge shabashi to all of you. It's not easy doing it day after day after day with a smile on your face. So, kudos to all of you. It's okay to not be okay. Do complain, do share, get it out of your system, so that unless you are fine and you are 100%, you can't look after anybody else. So it's important to look after yourself in the total holistic manner.
Right. I hope there are enough caregivers listening to you, Dr. Rajam. I hope it makes them feel really, really much, much better.
They are special, because statistics also show that you need to be having 2.5 daughters if you have to be cared well. So, also to the women folk. And somehow there's a gender bias there too. It's automatically a woman's role to caregive. So why, we don't know. But again, more power to women.
Absolutely. More power to us. Absolutely. Dr. Sujata, this is a question again which has come in from our session last 2 weeks ago, where they have been asking about nutrition, how and the relevance of nutrition to be preparing better at this stage. Why, how, and what is it that anyone can do at this point of time in terms of nutrition?
Yes, Gayatri, I think this COVID-19 has thrown up the topic of nutrition like never before. And right from all kinds of health supplements to over-the-counter prescriptions to vitamins to mineral supplements and protein powders and what have you. Everybody's trying it. It's just everybody's so vulnerable these days that anybody who says, okay, this is going to improve your resistance to COVID, this is going to improve your immunity, and you'll just take it blindfold. This is what has been the experience. Yet, having said that, I will definitely say that good diet, good nutrition plays a very, very vital role in improving our immunity in general, whether it's physical or mental, because the right balance of all nutrients, macro and micro, along with proteins, which are the building blocks of our body, all these together are definitely going to help you to have a better resistance to infections. But just pumping vitamins and having injections and taking vitamins round the clock is not going to improve your immunity overnight. But this is a wake-up call. We know that our immunity has been compromised. So many people are succumbing to COVID. Nature has given us this lesson because we have played too much with it. All kinds of artificial food, processed foods, refined foods, all the junk that we are putting into our bodies day in and day out, the unhealthy modes of living, the unhealthy sleep patterns, the sedentary lifestyles, and all our exercise is only up here. Whereas bodies are becoming sedentary. And all this has definitely, all over the world, see, this is a global phenomenon. There is no place, no corner in the world that you can actually go and escape to now. This is the situation. And with varied degrees, we've seen that even in the most evolved of societies, with the best of nutrition, now, the Western society has probably never known what it is to be undernourished because they are living in a much more affluent environment and in better living conditions. Even they have succumbed to COVID like never before. So, in a way, in a nutshell, I would say that in India, the truths that we knew, which we incorporated by default, it's time to take a look at them and standardize them. Our mode of cooking, our grandmothers always would say that eat fresh, eat hot, never eat cold food, don't eat stale food, don't eat food which is refrigerated just like that. Make sure that it is kept out, warmed, heated. Try not to eat food which has been kept overnight. And I think these are simple truths which the relevance of which we are now learning. We are learning the importance of fresh, basic ingredients in food. And that is what is happening. Because of the lockdown, by default, inadvertently, people are not eating out, not ordering in all the pizzas, burgers, and all the refined foods and all the Indian Chinese stuff is all out of the window, and we are now having simple home cooked meals. And inadvertently, it's all inadvertently because we don't know how much of how much benefits we are giving to our bodies, how much of how much good we are actually doing to our constitutions. So all these things, and there has been a lot of talk about zinc supplements and about vitamin C in helping in COVID, which of course is true because vitamin C is the anti-infective vitamin which helps in all kinds of infection, and even in colds and influenzas, high doses of vitamin C have known to reduce symptoms. Zinc, of course, is an important vital component of every human cell. It is also important for maintaining the protein balance, for building up proteins in the body. So particularly in COVID, they have said that taking a zinc supplement along with vitamin C is going to benefit. For whatever it is worth, at least it gives a sense of security to the person who is taking it. However, we need to build our immunity right now to prevent relapses, as Dr. Rajam very rightly pointed out some time ago. And of course, the second wave of that is coming because that is what is going to help us later. The immunity that you build up today might help you a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. And our whole concept of disease has to now start changing. We have to now start concentrating on wellness rather than on disease, facing disease or addressing disease. Building up wellness, building up immunity in good times. This is what should be now the focus. So you should start building up your immunity when times are good, when you're healthy, and not when you fall sick, because that's when your immunity is already compromised and you just cannot do anything to build it back. So the time is when you're well. To keep well is going to be the focus of this. I think that is the most important lesson that we are going to be learning post-COVID.
Sure. In fact, you brought me to that last question, which I was just about to ask you. What is that take-home message, that happy take-home message, maybe that you may want to have? I mean, you have thought of, which you think you've learned in the past few months. I mean, this question goes out to both of you before we start taking on the questions that have already started pouring in from our viewers. What is that happy take-home message from, or let me say, that happy learning that you've had over the past few months that you want to share? Dr. Sujata?
Yes. The biggest take-home message I would say is that stay home, stay safe, step out. Now unlocking is going to start. So step out even now. You have to step out only if necessary with a lot of precaution. The lockdown was for us and not for the COVID virus, because it doesn't know that the lockdown has been lifted. It is still everywhere. But for us, we need to take precautions over the next few months, perhaps a couple of years. Some say that it will be another 3-4 years before things actually come back to the pre-COVID era. Perhaps never. It's going to be the new normal from now on. But important thing is that this virus has brought home a little. It has been a tough message, but it has sent us this message that it takes very little to survive. And whatever little it takes to survive, we have whittled that away and run after things which were not important for living. So now we have to come back to our basics, whether it's basics of health, of relationships, about our environment. We have to focus on good things. And good things, not everything costs money. It takes very little to live well. And we need to concentrate on that. And I would say the biggest message that everybody must take from today is that learn to now stay connected. COVID has taught us to stay connected. Even if we are physically distanced, we are connected like never before. The kind of things that people have been, survival techniques, revival techniques that people have been employing over the past 4 months is amazing. At the end of this pandemic, you're going to have a lot of happy stories, courage stories, bravery stories, how people have survived this pandemic, how they've come out of this unscathed, how they've come, even in the worst of situations, losing their jobs, losing their livelihood, they've still come out of it very happily. There are a lot of success stories, and that will be another topic for another day. But this is the take-home message: is that stay home, go out if necessary, but stay home.
Right, nice. Dr. Rajam?
So I think in one way, I'm glad that it is 2020 and the pandemic has hit us, because thanks to technology, we are here and we've remained sane. Whether it is phone, whether it is Zoom, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it is TV, whether it's all the Netflix, Amazon, all those things. So I think technology is the big thumbs up in this pandemic. And I think everybody, including the poor toddlers, are on WhatsApp training and Zoom sessions for schooling. I think technology, therefore, I think we should use it in a very, very positive way so that you build your life. And like Dr. Sujata said, stay connected. It is time. I think this pandemic has also showed us that it is time now more than ever to be showing that kindness, the compassion and empathy to each other, to all living beings, like how it started in the US, like Black Lives Matter. I think all lives matter. And I think that's one thing that the pandemic has really thrown in. And so open your hearts, open your wallets, be kind to people who, have lost their jobs, lost people. And I think be there for each other, because this pandemic is also, like I said, changed the face of grief and bereavement. People don't get closures. So be there for your loved ones, for your friends, even if you can't be there physically, just, in your own way, stay connected to them, and use your technology, use your bank balance and your heart and brains in the best possible way to spread love, because I think that's the only thing that's going to tide us over this crisis, whenever that is, till the vaccine comes, until all of us are vaccinated. So like Dr. Nayak said, the lockdown is now easing. Even more time to be cautious. Use your masks and wash your hands, and please stay away from crowded places. So that's very, very important. And you cannot get lackadaisical about that.
Oh, thank you. I would love to continue talking to you, but we've got questions coming up here, which are just waiting to be answered. So yes, the first question goes thus. We have Kirti Desai, who's been texting and chatting with Dr. Rajam too, and she's asking this question: are people with autoimmune conditions more susceptible to getting infected? Dr. Sujata, would you like to take this question, please?
Yes, thank you. And yeah, it is a very relevant question. And as we have seen that in COVID-19, there are people with comorbidities who are more susceptible to the infection. And people with autoimmune disorders, like, say, just for example, chronic bronchial asthma or interstitial lung disease or rheumatoid arthritis or sarcoidosis, or so many other in autoimmune disorders. Such patients are already on, if they are on conventional therapy, conventional medicine, modern medicine, they are probably on steroids or immunosuppressive drugs, which reduce their immunity further. And such patients are at a much higher risk of contracting infections, which could be called opportunistic infections, because the virus will enter an immunocompromised constitution. So they are definitely more susceptible, but we have seen that in this COVID-19, this is the mystery surrounding this particular viral infection, is that though people with comorbidities are more susceptible, we have seen all kinds of variations in this. I would just like to give an example where a whole entire family of 4 or 5 members were our patients during the COVID-19 epidemic, and all of them were tested positive. One of the patients, the lady of the house, is a case of interstitial lung disease and has been taking high flow oxygen throughout. She was the one targeted as being the most immunocompromised and the most likely person to succumb to it. I mean, the pulmonologist was so afraid, and he said that she's the one who has to be admitted to the hospital. But what surprisingly to our what we saw was that she recovered very quickly, and her husband, who had practically no comorbidities, actually had to be admitted, hospitalized with more serious symptoms. So this is a very, very strange pandemic. Nevertheless, statistically speaking, people with autoimmune disorders need to take more care and need to be more sheltered. So they would do much better if they were not exposed to the outside atmosphere for some more time compared to the others. That's for sure, yes.
Thank you. Kirti Desai, I hope that answered your question. I'm moving on to the next. Dr. Rajam, there is Kamala Ramamurthy, who is asking you about fibrosis. You mentioned about fibrosis progressing. Could you elaborate, please?
So, what I meant by fibrosis is we have now started seeing patients who have had the COVID infection with the typical features on X-ray and CT scan of the COVID pneumonia, which we call as ground glass opacities. And that means like the frosting of the glass when you finish a shower. That's how the lung looks on the CT. And that typically it has been noticed to heal in the body as fibrosis. To make it even more simpler, it's like if you have an injury with the hot water on your arm, or any part of the body heals with a scar and fibrosis. So it definitely leaves a mark behind. Similarly, what we have noticed in COVID infections, post-COVID pneumonia, is that it causes interstitial fibrosis, which is lung parenchymal fibrosis. Unlike a bacterial pneumonia, which affects the lung parenchyma, and when you take an X-ray after 6 or 8 weeks, there is no sign of the bacterial pneumonia. The lung is it's an acute event and the lung is completely healed. But in COVID pneumonia, because it's an interstitial pneumonia, what we have seen is that there is an acute inflammation in the lung as a result of the virus, followed by this ground glass opacity. And there are some reported patients who have had residual fibrosis, or the body heals by fibrosis. So again, it's too early for us to say how this fibrosis will behave. But what we know about lung fibrosis is that usually it's progressive, even if it is slow, and there isn't much treatment except for certain antifibrotics which are now available, but you can't really completely reverse the already fibrosed lung. So it does make the lung and the person more compromised.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope that answered your question, Kamala Ramamurthy. We have the next one, which which is addressed to you, Dr. Sujata. Are there going to be any long-term effects for a person who has COVID? Specifically, how can homeopathy help here?
Yes, I think we've been
This is
speaking about
from,
this.
yeah,
Yes,
exactly, from
yeah,
Sadhna
speaking
Kinney.
about this. Nevertheless, I'd like to answer this from the homeopathic point of view. Is we believe that we still don't have any conclusive proof saying that okay, there are going to be relapses or long-term complications. We have no idea about how bad the complications, if at all, they will be. But judging from the way statistically also about the way people have been responding to the ones who have already suffered from COVID in the months of say February or March, and now in the post-COVID state, they are still struggling to get back to normalcy. There are physical aspects to this. The physical symptoms would be, as Dr. Rajam mentioned just now, is about the myalgia, the muscle pains, the muscle aches, the asthenia, the weakness of the muscles, sometimes a residual cough which doesn't seem to go away, or just simply lowering of stamina, lowering of energy levels, sometimes change in appetite, and an overall feeling of detachment from the environment. This a lot of patients have been saying that I still don't feel up to it. I don't feel that I can get back to work yet. Even if I've started work from home, I'm not the same that I was. So a lot of it is, they say that the pathology of the COVID-19, this is also something which is strange about this virus, is that a lot of patients, we're getting data now about this, a lot of patients have been reporting psychological effects with the COVID infection. Now there is still the data is still coming in, and we still have to have concluding evidence on this, is whether the symptoms are associated with the COVID viral infection, or are they an associate of the environment that the patient has been exposed to. There is so much of fear psychosis. Social media has happily contributed to a large part of the fear factor. And these are the things that the patient undergoes. The anxiety, the moment he hears that he's COVID positive, is something which is a completely new kind of emotion that we have seen in recent times. The fear, the panic, the sense of doom which they experience, so it's something like an impending doom. That, oh, now I'm COVID positive. At least until recently, now the virulence is coming down a bit. So more people are now being encouraged to being managed at home. But until very recent, every COVID positive patient had to be hospitalized, and that was something very scary, because the fear that they will be away from their loved ones, they'll be in isolation, they'll have nobody to look around. When they open their eyes, their loved ones will not be around them. Perhaps they will die in isolation. Nobody will be there for my last rites. What happens if my loved one falls sick, if he's admitted to the hospital? So these are the fears that are associated with this particular pandemic, and they might have some long-term sequelae. And similar to what, as we said in our last session, if you recall, is that the emotions that patients undergo are something similar like what you would experience in a war-like situation. So when the war gets over, there is something known as a post-traumatic stress disorder. So when a person experiences that, comes face to face with this kind of an acute stress, the fallout of that in the long term, the residual psychological effects can be immense. So even patients who have come out of COVID, like those who have come out even with home quarantine, suffer from these anxiety attacks. And the patients who have come back from ICUs will have another very different story to tell, because they have probably been there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks in a state of complete timelessness, disorientation. There's also a term known as ICU psychosis, and the effects of which can stay on for longer. So these are the physical and the psychological effects. Now, homeopathy has a very, very huge role to play in the post-COVID scenario. Even during, as a prophylaxis, as immune boosters, of course, it was played a big role. In terms of acute illness, of course, we needed, if the patient had to be hospitalized, if he needed oxygen, of course, that had to be done. And conventional medicine is at its best when you address acute disease conditions and emergencies. But the post-COVID part, the residual effects, whether they are physical or psychological, are still very unclear. And we believe that when the patients that we are going to be treating constitutionally with homeopathic treatment at this phase probably will be in a better position to face those relapses later, either at the physical or the psychological levels. And it remains to be seen, of course. We need more and more data is coming in, and we will have more evidence-based proofs now to show that this is what is actually there. And but this is what, because homeopathy and of course the other alternative systems are going to be looking at this problem holistically, and it's time to look at this holistically, absolutely, because the we've long looked at disease only in the physical sense of terms, but now we need to look at it as a component of physical, mental and emotional totality. So now there has to be a combined and an integrative approach towards this problem. this is the need of the time, and that is what homeopathy is going to help you to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Sadhna. Beryl has a question, which I'm sure both of you will be able to answer. You take a call. How can we care for an elderly who is otherwise active with Parkinson's? Now, with the lockdown and strict society rules, he is hallucinating and also being aggressive. Dr. Rajan, would you
I'm
like?
happy to answer that. Maybe Dr. Sujata can add to it. I think hallucination is a common side effect of Parkinson's, anti-Parkinson's medications. And it is something which is not easy to manage at home. And like you said, with the pandemic and reduced home help, it might be even more difficult for the caregivers to manage it. So I have a few suggestions here. First is to, reassure the patient. It sometimes can get very irritating when the patient is complaining and the caregiver keeps snapping because it keeps going on, the hallucination. It is for real. These patients do hallucinate. To therefore acknowledge that it can be and reassure them. You must get back to the neurologist because you can have some dose adjustment, and you could, if possible, there are certain geriatric psychiatrists in the city, and since most consultations are virtual, you could actually help by tweaking medications, by adding certain antipsychotic medications, so that it's less stressful for the patient as well as for the caregiver. So please address it. It's not a part of the Parkinson's disease, or it's not saying that there's a cognitive decline, but it could be due to the medications. So please do consult your neurologist, and if possible also a geriatric psychiatrist, because it also could be the effect of the pandemic, the stress at home, and just the fact that there is no other source of entertainment for the elderly with Parkinson's.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
hope
Thank
that
you.
satisfies you.
I hope so too. Dr. Sujata, would you like to add anything here?
I think Rajam has very, very elaborately explained this. But just to add to it, that I don't, it's very unlikely that the Parkinson's problem, the patient with the Parkinson's disease, the situation is actually the one which is the cause. It could be just a trigger here, because Parkinson's is an organic neurological disease. And as Dr. Rajam said, that we need to consult the neurologist, the neurophysician, as well as the geriatric psychiatrist who can adjust the dose. And the hallucination is not probably related to the situation, but more to do with the anti-Parkinson's dose that needs to be adjusted. However, sometimes, when the changing situation at home, especially one of the members has been tested COVID positive, or one of the members has been admitted to the hospital, and even if the Parkinson's patient is not very oriented, is a little detached, even then in such a situation, the changing environment at home, when there's an underlying tension, such a patient can sense, and that could be the reason for his restlessness. And reassurance, of course, is the key. Homeopathy also has some immediate remedies for this. We have remedies like Cocculus and Acid Pos and Gelsemium, which has played a very, very big role in this pandemic, to reassure people who are into panic attacks and anxiety attacks. So perhaps, even consulting a homeopath in a situation like this could help.
Sure, thank you for that. Thank you for answering the question, both of you. I hope that has helped Beryl, helped you understand that better. There is Akshay Kore who's asked on Facebook, my uncle, 40 years old, has always been extremely particular about his fitness and health, a non-smoker and a non-alcoholic. He hardly stepped outside the house since the beginning of the pandemic, but still he got infected with corona and landed in the ICU. How is that possible? Dr. Rajam?
So, it's sorry to hear that, Akshay. It's again one of those things which is beyond medical science, I think. So I suppose the other thing, which might sound a bit fatalistic, is the fact that we all look after ourselves, but still we do take ill. So it could be, I'm not trying to blame anybody here, but it could be even a small lapse in hand wash, or these are the only things I can think of. If somebody's been very careful, some place where maybe there was proximity with people, we really don't know. And I think a big chunk also depends on the viral load in the atmosphere that you're living in. So if there is a place where there is crowding, like a market or whatever, when there's a viral load, even through the mask, sometimes you can, especially if people are talking loudly, and people do with their mask, or so cough or sneeze by accident, and they are carriers. So these are very difficult questions to answer, and I think it's uh, also difficult to accept how this can happen to a loved one who is so careful. But honestly, this is chance. And I mean, it's like so many times we don't have explanations for a non-smoker, non-alcoholic, super fit person who dies of just dropping off of the treadmill. So, and it is known, sudden deaths are known under the age of 50. Once you cross the age of 50 is where sudden deaths actually drop. But maybe he was susceptible because he had a low immunity, and immunity is also built with good sleep, diet, and exercise. So if that is been a bit of a balance, maybe he's exercising a lot and all of that, but even sleep is important, and even nutrition is. So really don't have an answer for that, but I hope he's better and out of ICU, and prayers for his speedy recovery.
Yeah. Can we move to the next question? Dr. Sujata, would you like to answer that question?
I'd just like to just add to what Rajam has said, which is very, very informative and complete. But just one thing is that genetic predisposition is something that is something we have really no answer to sometimes, why a person is genetically predisposed to a certain kind of ailment. Maybe there are certain gene markers, there's some kind of a genetic makeup that the patient has, which predisposes him to the virus, and the virus is probably attacking such constitutions. There is really no explanation to that, and this is where holistic medicine, especially homeopathy, plays a lot of stress on, is the predisposition of the patient. And we believe that virus is not really the cause. Its virus is very secondary. The ground has to be prepared first for the virus to enter, and why the virus enters certain constitutions is something very interesting, the way a homeopath would study it. And constitutional predisposition is the thing. So it is an entire makeup of your physical, your mental, your emotional components together, and those are going to predispose you to any kind of an illness. And this probably would answer a lot of such questions when you realize that there is no cause effect ratio, which is so obvious, or so what would you say, so marked. And this is very unfortunate, of course. And Akshay, as Dr. Rajam has said, that our prayers and wishes go out to your uncle. And I hope that he is out of the ICU now. But this is something again very, very peculiar to COVID-19, where most unexpected kind of patients have been succumbing to the illness. Patients just about to get well, and then they deteriorate very, very quickly. So this is something which we haven't been able to explain the phenomena so far, but more studies are on the way, and I'm sure that there'll be an answer to this very, very soon.
I hope so. That made you get some answers. We move to the next question. Dr. Dipti Shinde is asking, can supportive measures and dietary measures be helpful in COVID, and does that need to continue, and for how long? So there is, I believe somebody has asked her this question. So which is where supportive measures and dietary measures, and how long to continue? Would like to take that question.
So what exactly would she mean by supportive? I just want to clarify the question, and then Sujata can answer. I'm also wondering what is
supportive, that's what's mentioned. Can supportive?
I guess supportive means, all inhalation and, drinking only hot water and not stepping out. And that, I think that is what she probably means, by supportive measures. And let's just assume that it is that. So these supportive measures and the dietary factors together, of course, they help. They even help. It has been like something like a gospel truth which every system has been propagating, and that is the importance of steam inhalation. So even epidemiologists, virologists, infectious disease specialists, and MD physicians and lung specialists are saying that steam inhalation will do good, no harm, absolutely. And because the logical explanation being that the virus does not survive beyond 70 degrees. So taking regular steam inhalations, which, the virus, if it is somewhere in the paranasal tract and it has not entered the lungs yet, might actually help to eliminate it at that stage. Again, these are all hypotheses, but then everything about COVID-19 is still hypothesis. And the hypothesis of today becomes the common sense of tomorrow. So these things, whether it is dietary restrictions, dietary changes, eating healthy and eating fresh and hot, and exercising and doing pranayama, all breathing exercises, should be practiced by default even otherwise. Why has it taken the COVID-19 for us to teach us this hard lesson? Which means that these measures should be continued irrespective of how active the COVID is. So even in the post-COVID era, if we need to keep healthy and fit and protect ourselves against another pandemic of this sort, if God forbid, if it ever comes, or the second wave of the same COVID-19, it might become COVID-20 and 21 later on if it's a new, again, another virus of the corona family. So these are the factors, that are going to stand us in good stead. So this is not a punishment period or a task that needs to be done in the nutrition and the supportive measures. These are the disciplinary measures that we need to inculcate now and continue them so that we remain healthy and we remain better our immunities are in a better shape and pace to take the onslaught of another virus if it comes at all, or if any other disease affects you, because these are measures that are going to help you in the long run, that's for sure.
Sure, absolutely. When you say COVID 2021, I don't even want to think about it. Okay, I don't even want to think about it. Even if it's a joke or even if you're being serious, I'm not going to question you on that. We'll move on to Krishnan Krishnamurthy's question. Is there any scientific reason behind 14 days or 28 days quarantine? We have cases where people get infected even after 45 to 50 days. Dr. Rajam, you have responded to Krishnan on chat, but I think we can make this public so that
Sure, it's just that I think by research and seeing the nature of the virus's behavior, epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists feel that it's up to 14 days by which most people get the symptoms after the exposure. It could be less and it could be more. And that depends on the person's immunity, the viral load that is exposed, the duration. So they say anything more than 15 minutes of exposure is definitely a significant time limit to get infected. And also, of course, the virulence of the virus. So if you have had, say, 1-2 inhaled virus, the person's immunity is good, maybe it just doesn't even get registered. So a multiple factor. So it's an average that they have taken to be 14, but obviously we need to be safe and careful and far away from people who may be infected, or therefore avoid crowding. So 14 days is considered that ideal optimum time by which time, if you have been exposed, you will develop symptoms.
Okay. I hope that answered your question, Krishnan Krishnamurthy. We have Samruddhi who is asking, I'm worried where COVID can cause coagulable state causing stroke. I want to understand how homeopathy can help in such cases. Dr. Sujata?
Won't you repeat the question, Gayatri?
I'm worried where COVID can cause coagulable state. She's probably talking about that coagulation causing a stroke.
Okay. Yes. So,
you want me to come again with the question?
Yeah, hypercoagulable state. Okay. From that, I would, Dr. Rajam, is the question very clear to you?
So, no. So it's been proved in the autopsy reports and in the way certain patients behave that COVID has formed to be pro-clotting. And that's why there are many patients who suddenly deteriorate. So it could be clot anywhere. So it could be a clot even in the brain that results in stroke. So I think that is what so basically the point here is what we have started doing in ICUs and patients who are coming to hospital with moderate symptoms of COVID is start them on a blood thinner to be safe and keep it on for 3 weeks after discharge. That is what we are doing in allopathy. What I think this lady wanted to ask was about whether there's something in homeopathy that we could do it.
Yeah, and she was also asking nowadays a lot of...
I did understand your question from the point which Dr. Rajam explained, but I would like to know whether your husband has been tested COVID positive and that's why you're worried and that is what the neurologist has recommended, or generally he is prone to any other lifestyle issues like hypertension, or does he have any history of any cardiovascular illness, because that is what is going to determine the risk factor in future. So if he, suppose any of these have been there, then definitely you need to take proper constitutional treatment from a homeopath who will determine all the factors, including the genetic predisposition and his physical and mental constitution, which might predispose him or make him at a risk to develop the the clotting issues later. For example, as you said, that we know that in COVID-19, clotting is the biggest problem. And so a pulmonary embolism or a sudden clot or a stroke can result in that. So definitely, if none of this has happened and he's still in a safe zone, then for preventive purposes, you should visit a homeopath and take the treatment from now on. However, if he has suffered any of these and he needs to be on something for immediate results, then as Dr. Rajam said, that he needs to consult a cardiovascular specialist who might prescribe some anti-clotting medicines from now on, like simple aspirin perhaps, which will tide him over and which might prevent a sudden episode.
Thank you. There is a question which has come from Vijay Lakshmi, and she's, I'm sure, a caregiver who's really, really spoken her heart out. My husband has been on dialysis since the last 15 years, besides which he is also on depression medications. Besides this, his immunity is low. We've been very careful and cautious. Masks, hand gloves. He will not touch the door latches, will not step out for any other work at home. All things, remotes, latches, mobile phones, etc., sanitized before he touches it. Regular immunity booster herbal products being given, newspapers are stopped. Yet I would like to know if I'm lacking on something. Is there anything more I can do to take it? This is a question to both of you.
Sujata, you want to go ahead first?
Well, Dr. Rajam, you take the lead.
Sure. So I think there seems to be something else. I think there's a big fear factor here and a borderline of maybe, I mean, I might be wrong. I've never seen the patient, but this extra fear of all the things, latches, etc., could be a borderline of OCD. And I completely can appreciate your stress and it's not easy looking after somebody for year after year for 15 years. So I hope even you have somebody else, a good support system to support you in this. Having said that, there is enough evidence to suggest now that it is an airborne infection. 1, 2, it spreads by droplet nuclei. So cough, loud singing, loud talking, sneezing. The touch per se is much, much lower. So as far as you keep washing your hands after touching anything is more than enough. Please, I mean, I know these things about wipes, so you don't have to keep doing it. And I think, in fact, gloves is more dangerous. So use your hands, wash your hands well. And like children are taught in school, till you finish singing the happy birthday song, that long you need to wash your hands. So please wash your hands. That's more than enough. Maybe he will require, it's also the pandemic atmosphere that's getting him into him, the stop watching the news. Everybody only talks about corona. So some digression, maybe some carom board, Scrabble, some card game, something else needs to be here. And now that's easing lockdown, maybe you could even have people over with the social distancing so that it's a change of scene for him. I don't think you have to be so over obsessed with the this whole wiping latches, wiping remotes, etc. You should be careful, of course, especially if somebody from outside has come and touched it, but wash your hands. I think that is more than enough. I think there is an article which probably I could forward it if you drop in your email about this this thing about wiping stuff and washing stuff. It is really not needed. As far as you maintain basic hygiene, it is much more than enough, and just keep washing those hands.
Okay, thank you.
Very
Sujata?
Yes, in fact, I would just like to take this a little ahead, saying that we've had patients who've been over obsessed with the fear about COVID, and even talking just the other day, as I said, that somebody called me up on the phone and said that, oh, I was talking to my friend for an hour and then I realized that she's COVID positive. So will that affect me? I mean, this is the level to which fear psychosis has gone. So all this fear about, because this has been dinged into our heads that you have to keep washing, keep sanitizing, keep distancing. And again, there is so much confusion. You see people roaming on the streets without masks and they don't suffer, and people taking care and they suffer. So then the people who are taking all the precautions say, why should I do all this? Why should I be in lockdown when there are people who are throwing caution to the winds? But remember that all this is based on statistical data. All this is based on the studies that have been conducted in the previous epidemics, all the viral epidemics. And it is more or less a given that unless you follow the sanitation measures, unless you follow hand hygiene, because that is how viruses spread. unless you follow that, you're not going to be safe from this, because this is the best way to prevent a virus, the infection. But the obsession about cleanliness is so much that that itself is setting off stress, and that is actually releasing stress hormones. And we know that fear actually releases stress hormones. So there is so much of stress on your adrenal cortex, so much of increase in cortisol and adrenaline, with an increase in blood pressure, and again reducing your immunity in turn. So over obsession of health is in fact detrimental to health itself, and that people need to follow. Is that beyond a certain limit, you cannot do anything. This is only this much that we can all do. Beyond that, you have to rely on your genes, your good habits, and providence, because there is a huge question mark behind a lot of these theories and logic as well. So getting obsessed about health is also not done.
Sure. Vijay Lakshmi, I hope that gives you some comfort. Thank you for sharing your email ID. Our doctors will reach out to you with the links that you can read on to make you feel a lot more confident. We have 2 more questions. We have to wind up, I know, but we'll just answer this. These are the general ones. The doctors are saying that COVID is here to stay. So are we always going to be living in this fear? Asks Mr. Zoshi.
Yes, COVID is going to be here to stay. Like I said, till we find a safe, effective vaccine, and by the time we all get vaccinated, and we have to get vaccinated year on year, and the fact that we hope, like normal viruses, COVID also will mutate to become weaker, like how the 1918 Spanish pandemic flu started. People died of it, and now with the flu, you're expected to work in 2 days' time. So similarly, hopefully, in the next few years, we'll reach that stage. The fear factor is natural. Even I have had days where I panic and I get scared going to hospital and going to see COVID positive patients. But I think as far as we are careful and do things with social responsibility, so avoid crowds is one, washing hands and mask, very, very important. And obviously looking after your basic health, like Dr. Nayak has been so enforcing through this talk. Fear is something you really need to work on. So probably yoga, meditation, and if it really is you're not able to cope, then maybe chatting with a counselor will help. It's just like chatting to another person who can give you some tips to cope, because all of us are going through this. You're not in this alone, and talk about it, share, and like I said, stay connected and talk to people who will not judge you. So therefore a counselor will make a difference. So I completely empathize with you about being scared. All of us are scared at different levels. But this is it. We have to live with this, and we hope to see the other side of it. So
Absolutely.
Good luck to you. Reach out to somebody whom you can trust, and hope you don't be as scared as you are or you think you might be.
Right.
So take care of yourself.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Sujata.
Yes, Rajam, very well put. Let me also be a little optimistic in this, is that the COVID is here to stay, but our fear need not stay. There would be times when we might experience a relapse, or we might even see a second wave. But now we'll be more prepared. Now that the enemy is known, we know that it is there, COVID is there, it's going to be around us. We have been dealing with, in our country, we're dealing with all kinds of viruses, all kinds of microorganisms, and we are learning to live with them. So whether it's dengue, malaria, or typhoid, or leptospirosis, and so many others, we know what precautions to take. We know how to handle it. It's the uncertainty, it's the unpredictability of COVID-19 that has instilled the fear into us. The fear of isolation, of loneliness, of not knowing how it is going to go. Now, and this fear has actually, this fear of death, fear of isolation and loneliness has actually instilled this the restrictions that we are now following, which are being enforced upon us. But what we can do is we can convert this fear into discipline henceforth. What has come to us through force can now be inculcated by default. So whether it's sanitation, hand hygiene, eating good food, practicing physical distancing, not going to crowded places, as Dr. Rajam said. This is something, let us now let it become a habit with us. And once it becomes a habit, you will not have to have the person blaring into your phone every time you pick up your cell phone saying that Corona is now, unlocking is started. So now don't be partial, don't be partisan towards the people suffering from COVID, be more empathetic. because he will be empathetic by default. So initially it is through force, discipline has to be inculcated, and then it comes voluntarily. So we can convert this fear into discipline, and that is how we can look at it. So let's not look at fear as a negative emotion. We can convert it into a very, very positive emotion. So we don't want to be tested COVID positive, but let us be very positive about everything.
Very well said. Thank you. Thank you for that. There is, of course, Mrs. Zogekar who's asked a question, but that is very, very, it's almost overlapping your answers here. So we could probably use that as the last. I know that I miss talking to both of you together. I mean, where we can sit together over a cup of tea or coffee. And I know Rajam's been talking of how we must go out and eat. I mean, this has been our plan for a very, very long time. And then things happened and we just couldn't do it. Coming back to her question and to what I just said, when can we do this freely?
I don't think restaurants are open yet. So we'll probably have to wait. But I think you could meet in an open space. So unfortunately, we have the monsoon. But I think open air is considered to be the lowest risk with, again, physical distancing. So you could order takeaway or maybe potluck from home and maybe have a little picnic. But indoors, large gatherings of more than 3 or 4, I don't think is advisable. So again, caution is the only thing I can say. It might, you might do it once and get lucky, but I wouldn't try to push your luck. So outdoors, yes, you can meet 3-4 people. You can even go for a walk, or you can, do those activities. Don't do strenuous cardio with a mask on, because that is also dangerous. So again, doing that with people is not a good idea. It's good if you're alone when you're doing strenuous cardio. Simple walk or a stroll, that is okay with friends. Again, maintaining social. Outside is fine. Inside, I don't think it's right yet. But of course, you can have a well-ventilated room and a group of 2 and 3. So maybe you, me, and Dr. Sujata could still plan, fingers crossed, someday soon. But I don't think big gatherings and 6-7 people is a good idea yet.
Okay. So Dr. Sujata, anything that you'd like to add here?
Yes, so and we can meet but not hug now. We have to, the whole world needs to understand what India has been doing all along, and that is Namaste. So that is going to be the mantra everywhere in the world. So physical distancing would mean that no shake hands, no hugging unnecessarily, especially with strangers. Namaste is going to be the thing. If you realize the scientific relevance of this simple gesture, it's amazing. The people much earlier generations realized the importance, and probably this was out of health reasons. Today we give it a traditional connotation, but probably it was out of health reasons that we were taught not to go and have any kind of physical contact with strangers. Probably it was because they didn't understand microorganisms, but they understood that the incidence of disease goes up when this kind of a contact happens. So definitely Namaste is in now for all of us. And of course, as she said, that crowding and in closed spaces, in air-conditioned environments, having a big gathering, sitting close by, even in a family, I would say that today also people who are exposed to COVID patients, especially healthcare providers and doctors, even if you are at home with people you are all the time, make sure that if there is somebody with comorbidity at home, like somebody who's a high diabetic or a heart patient or a very, very elderly person, try to keep more physical distance with that person, like not sit on the same sofa, or keep your bed and your clothes separate. They should be separately washed. Don't come within 3 feet distance of that person. This is very important. Try not to sleep on the same bed. These are very simple things, but if we follow them, there is no reason for us to feel that, we are in very bad times. This might just become the norm, and it's a very healthy norm. So cheers to that, actually. And of course, we are looking forward to that little restaurant outing.
Soon.
I know that. I know, very soon. We're not putting a date to that, but yes. Thank you, Dr. Sujata. Thank you, Dr. Rajam, for joining. And we enjoyed, as always, our conversations are very, very lively. We'll wait to do this and to do this once in time, like both of you say, soon. And as for the rest of you, it's been a pleasure talking. Thank you for joining us. Do keep up with your queries, your questions, your interests, your opinions. Dr. Sujata's and Dr. Rajam's emails and contact details have been shared with you all. We'll be happy that you connect with us. We'll be happy to help you understand and, of course, make you feel better and comfort you in whatever way possible. Do write in, do listen in, and we'll wait to come back for more. Thank you and stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you and
Thank
have
you
a good
very
evening.
much. Have a lovely evening, all of you. Thank you.
You all. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.